The awakening becomes permanent, and once it does, there is no returning to who you used to be. Something shifts inside the empath, not loudly, not dramatically, but in silence. The people who once drained them can feel it. The manipulation stops working. The guilt no longer lands. The emotional doors quietly close. What happened? How does someone known for softness become untouchable without saying a word? Carl Jung warned that when a person integrates their shadow, they don't become cruel, they become conscious. And consciousness is dangerous to anyone who benefited from your confusion. In this video, we're going to uncover the exact moment an empath enters what I call the Sofia stage, the stage where wisdom replaces innocence, where silence replaces reaction, and where awakening becomes permanent. Stay until the end, because the final sign of this transformation is the one most people never see coming, but it changes everything. And if you've ever felt that quiet shift within yourself, don't just watch. Subscribe and leave a single word in the comments, awakened. I want to see who's already stepped into this stage. The breaking point rarely looks dramatic from the outside. There is no explosion, no public declaration, no visible collapse. It happens quietly inside the empath, the person who has always been described as sensitive, kind, understanding, the one who feels everything. In the early stage of their life, the empath moves through the world emotionally open, almost porous. They absorb tension in a room before anyone speaks. They feel shifts in tone, hidden resentment, unspoken sadness. Other people's pain does not stay outside of them. It enters, settles, and becomes their responsibility. They are the listener, the mediator, the healer. They believe their gift is to understand, to forgive, to give second chances. And for a long time, this feels like purpose. But slowly, something begins to erode. Chronic emotional exhaustion sets in. The empath starts waking up tired, not just physically, but psychologically. Conversations feel heavier. Relationships feel one-sided. They notice a pattern. They are always the one adjusting, explaining, calming, repairing. When conflict arises, they look inward first. What did I do wrong? How can I fix this? They overextend compassion even when it costs them self-respect. Because deep down, they fear that setting boundaries means becoming cold, selfish, or unloving. Then comes the rupture. It might be a betrayal that shatters their innocence, a moment when someone they protected, defended, or sacrificed for reveals indifference or manipulation. It might be repeated disappointments that form a clear pattern they can no longer deny. The empath realizes that some people were not confused or wounded in the way they imagined. Some were simply benefiting from their empathy. And this realization is devastating. Not because it proves the world is cruel, but because it forces the empath to confront their own role in the cycle. They begin to see that compassion without boundaries is not noble. It is self-destruction. This is the breaking point. Not the moment they are hurt, but the moment they understand. The empath doesn't become dangerous when hurt, they become dangerous when they understand. Hurt keeps them forgiving. Understanding changes them. In Jungian psychology, this marks the beginning of individuation. Carl Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole, of integrating the unconscious parts of oneself instead of projecting them outward. For the empath, this means something radical. They must stop identifying solely as the healer. That identity, once a source of pride, becomes a mask. Beneath it lies anger they never allowed themselves to feel, resentment they labeled as weakness, and a suppressed desire for power and self-protection. These are parts of the shadow, the aspects of the personality that were rejected because they didn't fit the image of being kind and selfless. At first, confronting the shadow feels uncomfortable. The empath may notice irritation rising faster than usual. They may feel less patient, less willing to explain themselves. Guilt follows quickly. Am I becoming bitter? Am I losing my softness? But what is actually happening is not corruption. It is integration. They are allowing themselves to feel anger without shame. They are acknowledging that boundaries are not cruelty. They are realizing that constantly absorbing others' pain does not make them virtuous, it makes them depleted. This awareness transforms their perception. They begin to see patterns they once ignored. They notice how certain people only approach them when they need emotional labor. They recognize manipulation disguised as vulnerability. They understand that empathy, when given blindly, attracts those who refuse to take responsibility for their own growth. And with this understanding comes a subtle but powerful shift. They stop over-explaining. They stop defending their need for space. They no longer rush to fix every misunderstanding. From the outside, others may sense something has changed. The empath is still calm, still composed, but less accessible. The endless emotional availability is gone. They listen, but they no longer absorb. They care, but they no longer carry. This is where their presence starts to feel different. Not aggressive, not cold, but firm, grounded, intentional. The breaking point, then, is not about becoming hard. It is about becoming conscious. The empath realizes that their sensitivity was never the problem. Their lack of boundaries was. They understand that true compassion includes the self. And once that understanding settles in, it cannot be undone. They can no longer pretend not to see what they see. They can no longer romanticize potential over reality. Awareness replaces illusion. This is the moment the awakening begins to solidify. The empath steps out of the unconscious role of savior and into the deliberate path of individuation. They are no longer trying to be everything for everyone. They are becoming whole within themselves. And that wholeness, quiet and self-contained, is what makes them powerful. The second stage of transformation is not gentle. It is not poetic or inspiring at first. It is uncomfortable, confronting, and deeply personal. This is the stage Carl Jung would call shadow integration, the moment when the empath finally turns inward and meets the parts of themselves they spent a lifetime denying. Most empaths grow up believing that anger is wrong, envy is ugly, and resentment is a personal failure. They build their identity around being understanding, patient, and emotionally available. So when darker emotions rise, they push them down. They smile through disrespect. They excuse betrayal. They convince themselves that feeling hurt is a sign they need to be more compassionate. But Jung warned that what you repress does not disappear. It waits, and what waits in the unconscious eventually controls your behavior in ways you don't even notice. For the empath, suppressed anger often leaks out as exhaustion. Repressed resentment shows up as passive compliance. Unacknowledged envy turns into quiet self-doubt. Because they refuse to consciously own these emotions, they remain trapped by them. They attract situations that trigger the very feelings they are trying to avoid. They feel used but cannot say no. They feel overlooked but cannot demand respect. The shadow operates silently, shaping their life from behind the scenes. And then something shifts. In what we call the Sofia stage, the empath stops running from these emotions. Instead of judging themselves for feeling anger, they become curious about it. Why am I angry? What boundary was crossed? What truth am I ignoring? This is the beginning of real power. The empath stops fearing their anger. They realize anger is not violence. It is information. It signals injustice, imbalance, and unmet needs. When acknowledged, anger becomes clarity. When integrated, it becomes strength. They no longer see aggression as something evil or destructive. They understand that aggression, in its healthy form, is the energy that allows a person to protect themselves, to speak firmly, to walk away without guilt. For years, they believed softness was their greatest virtue. Now they understand that softness without strength is vulnerability. Compassion without discernment invites exploitation. Kindness without boundaries invites control. This is where the word dangerous begins to make sense, but not in the way people expect. The empath does not become chaotic or cruel. They do not explode in rage or seek revenge. The danger lies in control, emotional control, self-control. They no longer react instantly to provocation. When someone tries to manipulate them through guilt, they feel the pull, but they do not move. When someone raises their voice, they do not mirror the intensity. They observe, they analyze, they choose their response instead of being driven by unconscious emotion. That shift alone changes every dynamic around them. From a psychological perspective, this is individuation in action. The empath is integrating the shadow instead of projecting it onto others. In the past, they may have labeled others as selfish or aggressive without recognizing those same capacities within themselves. Now they accept that they too have the ability to be firm, confrontational, even intimidating when necessary. And instead of fearing this realization, they embrace it. Because owning your darkness makes you less likely to be controlled by it. A person who acknowledges their capacity for anger is far less likely to explode unpredictably. A person who accepts their aggressive energy can channel it with precision. People around them start to feel the difference. The empath's energy becomes steady, almost unreadable. There is less emotional leakage, less over-explaining, less urgency to fix or please. When confronted, they pause. That pause is powerful. It signals that they are no longer operating from instinctual fear of rejection. They are evaluating the situation. They are measuring their response. They are choosing themselves. And this calm observation unsettles those who once relied on their emotional reactivity. Shadow integration also brings a new level of discernment. The empath begins to see when someone is projecting their own darkness. They recognize manipulation patterns faster. They notice when vulnerability is being used as a strategy rather than a genuine expression. But instead of reacting with outrage, they simply adjust their distance. This is not coldness. It is wisdom. It is the balance between heart and mind. The Sofia stage represents this fusion of empathy and awareness. The empath remains sensitive, but sensitivity is no longer a weakness. It is paired with strength. They can feel deeply without drowning. They can care without collapsing. They can love without losing themselves. And perhaps most importantly, they no longer fear their own complexity. They understand that being whole means containing both light and darkness. This is where true psychological maturity begins. The empath does not become less compassionate. They become more conscious. They do not abandon kindness. They refine it. And in that refinement lies their quiet power. They are no longer controlled by what they repress. They are guided by what they understand. And that understanding makes them steady, deliberate, and profoundly difficult to manipulate. Emotional detachment is often misunderstood. People hear the word detached and imagine someone cold, distant, or uncaring. But in the Sofia stage, detachment is not the absence of feeling. It is the mastery of it. Before awakening, the empath lives in constant explanation mode. They over-explain their intentions, their tone, their boundaries. If someone misunderstands them, they rush to clarify. If someone is upset, they feel responsible to fix it. If accused unfairly, they defend themselves with long emotional paragraphs, trying desperately to be seen correctly. Their greatest fear is being misunderstood because misunderstanding threatens connection. So they argue not to win, but to restore harmony. They prove not to dominate, but to protect their image as kind and good. They chase closure because unfinished emotional tension feels unbearable. Then something changes. After awakening, the empath begins to see a hard truth. Not everyone wants clarity. Some people want control. Some misunderstandings are intentional. Some arguments are traps designed to pull them back into emotional labor. And slowly they withdraw, not dramatically, not with announcement, just quietly. They stop arguing. When baited into conflict, they respond with fewer words. When accused, they no longer scramble to defend every detail. When someone tries to provoke guilt, they sit with the discomfort instead of reacting. This is not avoidance, it is discernment. They also stop probing. In the past, they felt an intense need to demonstrate their loyalty, their love, their integrity. They would go the extra mile to show they were not selfish, not cold, not wrong. But now they understand something deeper. The right people do not require constant proof, and the wrong people will never be satisfied by it. So they let their actions speak quietly. They let silence do what explanations never could. This shift feels subtle from the outside, but internally it is revolutionary. Perhaps the most powerful change is that they stop chasing closure. The old empath needed every conflict resolved neatly. They needed apologies, understanding, mutual acknowledgement. Without it, their mind would replay conversations for days, searching for what they could have said differently. But the awakened empath accepts that closure is not always mutual. Sometimes closure is a personal decision. Sometimes it is simply choosing to move forward without one more conversation. They no longer beg for understanding from people committed to misunderstanding them. This is where silence becomes strategic. Silence is no longer passive, it is deliberate. When they do not respond immediately, it is because they are observing. When they choose not to engage, it is because they recognize the pattern. Silence protects their energy. It creates space between stimulus and response, and in that space power grows. Because power is not loud, it is controlled. This silence unsettles people, especially those who were used to emotional access. Before, they could predict the empath's reactions. They knew how to trigger guilt, how to spark a defensive explanation. Now, the same tactics meet calm neutrality. A short answer, a steady gaze, no emotional spill. The empath becomes unreadable, and unreadable people are difficult to manipulate. You can't manipulate someone who no longer needs to be understood. That is the core shift. The awakened empath no longer depends on external validation to feel secure in their truth. They do not require everyone to see their heart to trust it themselves. When someone misjudges them, they feel the sting, but they do not collapse under it. They know who they are, and that internal certainty reduces the urge to explain. Psychologically, this marks a move from emotional reactivity to emotional regulation. Before awakening, their nervous system was constantly activated by conflict. Now they regulate before responding. They breathe, they think, they decide. The conversation no longer controls them. They control their participation in it. That choice alone changes every dynamic. It is important to understand that this detachment is not bitterness. It is not indifference. The empath still feels deeply. They still care. But they are selective about where that care is invested. They understand that constant emotional availability can become self-abandonment. So they create space. They allow silence to filter who truly values connection and who only valued control. Over time, their presence feels different, quieter, steadier, stronger. They do not rush to fill gaps in conversation. They are comfortable with pauses. They are comfortable with not having the last word. And in a world where everyone fights to be heard, the one who can remain silent without insecurity holds a rare kind of strength. Emotional detachment in this stage is not about shutting down. It is about rising above unnecessary emotional battles. It is about choosing peace over performance. And when an empath reaches this level of self-control, their silence speaks louder than any argument ever could. The Sofia archetype represents a profound shift in the empath's inner world, a movement from raw emotion to refined wisdom. In ancient symbolism, Sofia stands for divine wisdom, not just intelligence, but deep knowing. It is intuition fused with discernment, feeling balanced by clarity. When an empath reaches this stage, they are no longer guided purely by emotional waves. They are guided by awareness. They still feel deeply, but their feelings are filtered through understanding. They no longer confuse intensity with truth. They no longer mistake vulnerability for virtue. Something inside them becomes steady, almost luminous, as if emotion has matured into insight. In earlier stages, empathy was automatic. They felt everyone's pain and responded without hesitation. If someone cried, they comforted. If someone struggled, they sacrificed. Their heart led every decision. But now empathy becomes selective. This does not mean they care less. It means they care wisely. They begin to ask quiet questions before investing their energy. Is this person taking responsibility for their life? Is this pattern repeating? Is my compassion helping, or is it enabling? These questions arise naturally, without bitterness. They are not looking for flaws, they are looking for alignment. Compassion in this stage becomes earned. The empath no longer gives unlimited access to their emotional resources simply because someone appears wounded. They understand that wounds do not excuse harmful behavior. They recognize that some people use pain as a shield to avoid accountability, and instead of trying to rescue everyone, they allow people to face the consequences of their own actions. This is one of the hardest transformations for an empath because their identity was built around helping. But Sofia energy teaches them that true compassion includes boundaries. Without boundaries, compassion becomes self-neglect. Their energy also becomes guarded, not in a paranoid way, but in a sacred way. They become aware that their attention is valuable, their time is valuable, their emotional presence is valuable. They stop overextending themselves in conversations that feel draining. They limit exposure to chaotic dynamics. They protect their peace with quiet discipline. This guarding of energy changes how others experience them. They are no longer endlessly available. Access must be mutual and respectful. One of the most striking changes in this stage is pattern recognition. The empath begins to see dynamics almost instantly. Manipulation, narcissistic tendencies, projection, these patterns become clear without needing months of confusion. They notice inconsistencies between words and actions. They sense when flattery hides control. They recognize when someone projects their own insecurity onto them. This heightened awareness is not paranoia, it is perception sharpened by experience. Because they have integrated their shadow, they can see the shadows in others without fear. Yet here is where the Sofia archetype reveals its true depth. They do not expose people. They do not announce their discoveries. They do not gather evidence to confront or humiliate. Instead, they reposition themselves. They adjust their proximity. They change how much they share. They shift from emotional openness to polite distance. The person on the other side may not even realize what happened. There is no dramatic ending, no explosive argument, just a subtle withdrawal of access. This is the quiet danger. Not aggression, not revenge, but strategic distance. When an empath in this stage senses manipulation, they do not argue about it. They simply stop participating in it. When they detect narcissism, they stop feeding it with emotional reactions. When they recognize projection, they refuse to internalize it. Their calm refusal to engage removes the fuel that unhealthy dynamics depend on, and without fuel, those dynamics collapse. Wisdom over emotion does not mean emotion disappears. It means emotion is guided. The empath still feels compassion, but it is balanced by logic. They still feel love, but it is balanced by self-respect. They still feel sadness, but it is balanced by acceptance. This integration creates a centered presence. Others may sense that they cannot easily influence this person anymore. Compliments do not inflate them. Criticism does not shatter them. Drama does not hook them. They remain steady. Sofia energy also brings a deeper connection to intuition. The empath trusts their inner signals without needing external validation. If something feels off, they listen. If something feels aligned, they move toward it. They no longer override their instincts to maintain harmony. They understand that inner peace is more important than external approval. That is why this stage feels powerful. The empath is no longer operating from emotional urgency. They are operating from clarity. They do not need to control others because they control themselves. They do not need to win arguments because they have already chosen their position internally. And when someone realizes they can no longer manipulate, guilt, or confuse this person, it creates a subtle tension. The Sofia archetype is not about becoming untouchable. It is about becoming integrated. Emotion and intellect, heart and mind, softness and strength, all working together. The empath who reaches this stage is calm, perceptive, and deliberate. They do not expose people. They simply reposition themselves. And sometimes, the most powerful move a person can make is not confrontation, but quiet withdrawal. The awakening becomes permanent. That sentence carries weight because it marks a point of no return. Before this stage, The empath still lives with a quiet hope that things will go back to how they were, that people will change if given enough love, that misunderstandings can always be resolved with deeper patience. There is still innocence in the way they see the world. Even after being hurt, part of them wants to believe the best, wants to restore the old version of themselves who trusted easily and loved without hesitation. But when the awakening becomes permanent, something irreversible happens. The lens changes, and once the lens changes, you cannot force your eyes to see the old way again. This is the death of naivety. Not the death of kindness, not the death of empathy, but the death of unconscious kindness. Unconscious kindness is giving without awareness of cost. It is assuming everyone values your heart the way you do. It is ignoring red flags because you see someone's potential. It is choosing hope over evidence again and again. When the empath awakens permanently, they realize that potential is not reality. Who someone could be does not outweigh who they consistently show themselves to be. This realization feels heavy at first. It can even feel like grief, because along with naivety, a certain softness of illusion disappears. They no longer romanticize people's potential. In the past, they might have said, "They're not really like this. They're just struggling," or "I know deep down they're a good person." Now, they pay attention to patterns. They understand that character is revealed through repetition. One apology means little without changed behavior. One beautiful speech means little without consistent action. This shift does not come from cynicism. It comes from experience, from finally admitting that ignoring reality does not make it kinder. They begin to believe actions over words. Words once moved them deeply. Promises, emotional confessions, dramatic apologies, these used to soften their boundaries instantly. But permanent awakening teaches them that words are easy, consistency is rare. Effort is visible, accountability is measurable, so they watch what people do, not what they say. If someone claims to respect them but repeatedly crosses boundaries, the empath believes the behavior. If someone says they care but disappears when things get difficult, the empath believes the pattern. This creates a grounded, stable way of relating. It removes fantasy from connection. They also begin to value peace over connection. This is one of the most defining changes. Before awakening, connection was everything. Even unhealthy connection felt better than solitude. They tolerated chaos because they feared losing relationships. They endured emotional turbulence because they did not want to seem distant or unloving. But now, peace becomes sacred. If a relationship disturbs their inner stability, they question its place in their life. If a conversation drains their energy, they limit it. They would rather sit alone in calm silence than engage in dramatic attachment. This does not mean they isolate themselves. It means they choose quality over quantity, depth over noise. Carl Jung described individuation as a kind of psychological rebirth, and this stage reflects exactly that. Rebirth is not comfortable. It involves shedding old identities. The empath sheds the identity of the eternal rescuer, the endless forgiver, the one who always understands. In its place emerges a more balanced self, still compassionate, but self-aware, still loving, but self-protect is quiet. This rebirth knows ceremony, but internally it feels like stepping into solid ground after years of emotional instability. From the outside, some people may misinterpret this change as bitterness. They may say, "You've changed," with a tone that suggests disappointment. But the empath knows the truth. This isn't bitterness, it's clarity. Bitterness is reactive. Clarity is calm. Bitterness seeks to punish, clarity seeks to protect. The awakened empath does not hate those who hurt them. They simply see them accurately. And seeing accurately removes the illusion that once kept them entangled. There is also a new level of self-trust that develops. They trust their instincts more quickly. They do not need repeated proof before adjusting their boundaries. If something feels wrong, they listen. If something feels aligned, they lean in. This trust replaces the old habit of doubting themselves. They no longer override their intuition to maintain harmony. They understand that self-betrayal is far more damaging than disappointing someone else. Permanent awakening means there is no going back to unconscious kindness. They cannot unknow what they know. They cannot unsee the patterns they recognize. And surprisingly, this does not make their world darker. It makes it simpler. There is less confusion, less overthinking, less emotional chaos. Decisions become clearer because they are based on reality, not fantasy. The death of naivety is not the loss of hope, it is the refinement of it. Hope becomes selective, trust becomes intentional, love becomes mutual. The empath who reaches this stage is no longer drifting through relationships hoping to be valued. They are standing firmly in their own worth, choosing connections that honor it. And in that grounded clarity, the awakening truly becomes permanent. By the time the empath reaches the Sofia stage, something about them feels undeniably different. It is not louder, it is not dramatic. In fact, it is quieter than ever. But the quiet carries weight. In earlier stages, their presence was warm and inviting, sometimes even emotionally intense. People felt seen by them, understood by them, sometimes even rescued by them. Now, the energy has shifted. It is still warm, but it is grounded, still open, but measured. The empath no longer walks into a room unconsciously scanning for who needs saving. They walk in-centered within themselves. At this stage, they no longer need validation. That need used to operate beneath the surface. They wanted reassurance that they were kind enough, patient enough, good enough. They wanted acknowledgement for the emotional labor they gave so freely. A simple, "I appreciate you," could repair days of exhaustion. But now their sense of worth does not depend on being recognized. They know who they are without applause. They understand their value without it being spoken back to them. And when a person no longer depends on validation, they become emotionally independent in a way that is rare. Their energy becomes calm but firm. Calm does not mean passive, it means regulated. They do not rush to fill silence. They do not react impulsively to tension. They speak when necessary, and when they speak, their words carry intention. There is less explaining, less defending, less emotional leakage. At the same time, there is firmness. If a boundary is crossed, they address it directly or they quietly remove themselves. There is no dramatic performance around it, just clarity. This combination of calm and firmness creates a presence that feels stable, predictable in the best way, hard to shake. Their boundaries are unspoken but absolute. They no longer announce every limit in long conversations. They do not debate their right to protect their time or energy. Instead, their behavior reflects their standards. If someone disrespects them, access decreases. If someone manipulates, distance increases. There is no long explanation attached. The boundary is enforced through action. And because it is enforced consistently, people begin to sense it without being told. This is what makes their presence feel solid. There is an invisible line around them, and crossing it has quiet consequences. Their intuition also becomes razor sharp. Years of integrating their shadow and observing patterns have refined their perception. They pick up on subtle shifts in tone, inconsistencies in stories, emotional undercurrents in conversations. But unlike before, they do not absorb these signals emotionally. They process them mentally. They register what they see without being overwhelmed by it. This allows them to respond strategically instead of reactively. They trust their instincts without second-guessing them. That self-trust radiates outward as confidence. One of the most powerful changes at this stage is that they no longer seek to heal others. This may be the most misunderstood shift of all. In the past, healing others was almost automatic. If someone was broken, they leaned in. If someone was lost, they guided. But now they understand a deeper truth: healing cannot be forced, and it is not their responsibility. People must choose their own growth. The empath releases the burden of fixing everyone. Instead, they turn that healing energy inward. They invest in their own development, their own peace, their own stability, and that self-containment creates psychological gravity. When someone is emotionally self-sufficient, they stop chasing, proving, and pleading. They are not trying to extract reassurance or attention from others. They are not competing for dominance in conversations. They are simply present. This presence feels powerful because it is not needy. It does not pull, it does not cling, it stands. And people feel it. Some are drawn to it, sensing safety and maturity. Others are unsettled by it, sensing that control is no longer possible. There is also a subtle shift in how conflict affects them. At earlier stages, conflict felt personal and destabilizing. Now, it feels informational. If someone reacts strongly to their boundary, that reaction becomes data. If someone withdraws because they can no longer manipulate, that withdrawal confirms clarity. The empath does not panic. They observe. They adjust. They remain steady. This steadiness changes the emotional temperature of any room they enter. Ultimately, the quiet power of the Sofia stage is not about intimidation. It is about independence. The empath is no longer emotionally bargaining for connection. They are no longer afraid of being alone. They are no longer shrinking to maintain harmony. They exist fully as themselves without demanding anything from anyone. And that is why their presence feels different. It carries depth, it carries certainty, it carries peace. Because in the end, the most dangerous person in the room is not the loudest. It's the one who no longer needs anything from you.
Looks like you forgot, once again, how powerful you are.